So I'm going to show the steps on starting to throw a teapot body, making a flange for a lid, creating a lid, and creating the spout as well. I like to do all of these in one sitting, so I feel like I'm getting more of a unity between all the pieces, and everything's going to fit well together, and everything's going to be drying together. So this is the first video on just kind of throwing just the form and creating the flange. Making sure that I use a wooden rib tool that has a nice kind of 90-degree angle right here. I'm going to hold my fingers underneath, and notice that I'm holding this at an angle. I'm not holding it straight up and down. I don't want to gouge the piece. And as soon as I start feeling comfortable with the position that I'm at, I could increase my wheel speed slightly. And I'm just allowing that rim to just drop down, supporting it with my finger inside. You can now take the time to refine here. Seems to be a little bit of a shake. So I'm going to make sure before I take this piece off the wheel, try and fix that. If there is a little bit of off-centeredness in that interior circle that I formed, I'm just going to use my needle tool, cut that away, forming a nice clean opening. And just like any other lidded jar, I do not cut these off of that because I will be doing a lot of my trimming for the lid on this form, and so it's a little bit easier not to have to recenter this form. For this form, I'm going to want to make sure I do my measurements for my lid. So for this type of lid that I'm going to make, it's going to have a double flange lid. So it's going to lock in place really well. So I'm going to want to do two measurements. So when I measure my vessel, I want to make sure that my calipers are crossed. So I'm going to do an inside measurement. And when I get that measurement, I'm going to place it on a piece of paper. I'll lay it down. And I'm going to mark it. Just as so. So I can then change my calipers to be able to measure the lid. So I'm going to do one more measurement, which is from the corner to the corner here. And I'll mark that one one down as well. It's very important to mark your measurements, especially if you've just started throwing lidded forms. This is giving you a measurement of the form when it's wet. So let's say I have a bad day and I can't throw any lids that day. I can go back to these measurements that I have written down and be able to throw the lid so it shrinks appropriately to this form. So with my measurements that I have, I'm going to open my calipers to my first measurement, my smaller measurement of the two. Because remember, when I'm measuring my lids, I'm going to use my calipers open. And I'm going to put this off to the side. The amount of clay that I choose to throw for this is arbitrary because I'm going to be throwing these pieces off of the hump. So I want to at least make sure I have enough for maybe 1 or 2 lids, at least 1. I usually like to throw at least 2 off of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to section up a ball of clay that I feel like is a good amount for me to be working with. Now, in the beginning, I don't always know how much clay I should be using, but as I continue working, I'll learn that. So it might take you a few times, so be patient. So I'm gonna make sure this little ball of clay is nice and centered. And this one I'm gonna be throwing again upside down. So I am going to open the clay in the center, and I'm gonna widen this just as if I'm widening kind of a bowl. Now, at this point, I might want to do a quick measurement check to my first measure. Because what I'm looking for is I'm looking to widen the form so the middle of this width of the rim, sort of here, is about halfway in between. So I feel like I could widen a little bit more. And I'm going to compress that. What's also really important is that as you are throwing these forms, that you make sure that you are doing a good compression on that interior. So I usually like to just use my rib tool to give this a good compression. So again, using my first measurement, and I compress that, I want it to fall about halfway. So again, I feel like I should widen it just a little bit more. Not that bad, that's pretty good. Alright. Now I'm going to use, I could use my wooden rib tool, I could choose to use my fingers if I want. The first one I'm going to demonstrate is just with my wooden tool. So again, just as when I was creating the flange on the vessel, I'm not going to use it like this, I'm going to kind of use it on its side. And I'm going to press down, supporting underneath. And now what I'm going to do, sometimes this will be a little bit thicker, at other times not so thick. I'll just do a light pull. And what I'm looking for is for my calipers now to fit directly down. And right now it's a little too wide. I want it to fit all the way to this corner, all the way to this corner here. So if that happens, I'm going to take my wooden rib tool and I'm going to support with my inside finger, and I'm just going to push in lightly. And that is much better fit. That's where I'm looking for my calipers to land. So now I'm going to go in back to my measurement page here, and I'm going to open my calipers to this second measurement, which would be the whole width of the lid. And I'll put this off to the side. I am going to want to make sure that I'm refining those edges here. I'm taking out water. Alright, so using that second measurement, kind of hover over this, and I'm going to see how much excess I'm going to need to cut. It's going to be a good amount. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll kind of just glide my calipers over the piece, and it sometimes gives me just a light groove. Now I don't usually cut exactly to that groove because again it might be slightly off. I might cut a little bit larger. So put my fingers underneath my needle tool, cut through till it hits my finger, and then draw back. And then I'm going to compress this lip back. And going back with my calipers. I like to err a little bit on the side of caution, and if it seems to be a little, so notice that it's not a ton, but maybe it's a little big, maybe less than a centimeter, I might not cut that away. I might use some compression, and I also might, a lot of times people are very tentative when they're holding their calipers up against their newly thrown vessel, so maybe they're not touching it fully because they're worried about hitting it. So maybe that little bit extra width is going to help things out. So I'm gonna trim this down, but a lot of times when I trim these forms, I like to trim the knob from the mass of clay that I've cut. So I'm going to give myself a little bit of room here to be able to cut off and lift this off without distortion. And as well, I want to give myself the opportunity to be able to have enough clay that I can successfully trim a nice knob. So I gave myself a little groove here. Cut this away. And put this down. I usually, again, like to throw at least 2 lids for every single one of my lidded forms, just in case it doesn't fit well. Okay, so I have successfully thrown 2 lids for my form. Second one was much easier to throw because I had that kind of hand-eye memorization of kind of how much to widen and things like that. So now I'm up to doing spouts. When I throw porcelain, I actually like to throw 1 spout on the bat. I have these small bat system that I like to use. It's a little bit more difficult to take the spout off of a lump of clay from throwing off the hump when you are creating a spout. It's a little bit more tricky. They tend to distort a lot, so I like to kind of throw 1 at a time. And you do not need a lot of clay for a spout at all. I mean, I guess that's dependent on how large of a form you have or how tall of a spout you want, but it's really up to you. So I'm going to open this all the way down to the bat, and I'm going to widen this out. So I'm going to start pulling, and I have 1 finger on the interior, and I'm definitely pulling directly inward as I'm going. I want to start automatically creating that spout. I don't want to have to collar it. So sometimes when I'm throwing a spout, I like to give the bottom area here a little bit of volume. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to kind of give that a little bit of a pushing out. And then I'm going to start collaring this in. Every single time I do a collar, I am going to put one finger in and pull. And again, I'm going to start collaring. Every single time you collar the form, you're making those walls thicker. So it's really important to go back and pull that clay. So your spout actually ends up having an opening. If you don't do this, your spout walls will be so thick. Now, of course, there's a certain point where I'm not going to really be able to get my finger back in. But I try and get it as good and pulled as possible, even if I have to take my finger and kind of shove that back in to achieve that last pull. One last collar. And at times I like to use my metal ridge tool just to give it a little bit of refinement. I'm being very gentle with the rib tool. I don't worry too much about refining that top. That's going to be stuff that I'm going to do once after I attached the form. I like to give this a little bit of a cut down. And I do like to give this a wire cut.